at the Foundation for Nonviolent Alternatives. Um, we have been, let me give you a brief introduction of the FNBA before I launch into the topic itself. Uh, at the FNBA, we are a non-profit organization which is involved in quite in-depth analysis and research on Tibet and issues related to Tibet, with a view not only of learning more about the very fragile, at the same time a delicate territory, but also India's national security interests. That is the relevance that we try to bring into all the studies that we conduct on Tibet. We've had some landmark studies since the inception a decade ago, where we've talked about the ecology, we've talked about environment, we've talked about Buddhism, we've talked about riverine systems, we've talked about Tibet as of today, future, we've discussed the Dalai Lama's issue, we've discussed a whole range of very important and sensitive matters. When I say sensitive, it's only from the point of view of our interests, strategic interests. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to another topic, which has been very carefully selected, in fact, by the chair, who is also a fellow trustee of the FNBA. It is Xiaokang villages. As everybody knows, the Xiaokang actually means well-off villages. I would take just a couple of minutes to talk about the subject, just as a sort of very preliminary overview about it, and leave it to the galaxy of experts that we have today. I wouldn't like to even take a minute away from their valuable time and their expertise to speak something about it myself. So let me just start by giving you a very brief introduction about the subject that we are talking about today. It's soon after the conclusion of the 19th Party Congress in October 2017, the Chinese media started a publicity campaign where they talked about President Xi Jinping having received letters from two sisters from a village called Yumei in the Ningxi prefecture. And these were written by them, and he actually responded to them, which is a pretty rare kind of a thing that happens from a Chinese leader of his standing. This basically, the letter stated that these two ladies had been inhabitants of this region, which lies along the McMahon line. And of course, it's a part of the Arunachal Pradesh area. And they were the only inhabitants of the remote, almost 2,000, I think the exact figure, if I remember correctly, is 1976 square kilometer settlement, along with their father, between it was 79 and 1996. And slowly over the period of time from 96 to 2017, this number grew to about 32. And then they talk about their vast experiences in achieving what is referred to in the Chinese media as a feat in their letter to Xi Jinping. Now, in his reply, Xi Jinping makes some very important statements. These are, he talks about, he not only praises the family effort, but he also talks about the protection of the Chinese territory because of their efforts. And he exhorts them and others to continue to defend what he refers to as the sacred homeland. And then he calls on more herders to put down roots in the frozen soil of the border areas like Galsang flowers and become the guardians of Chinese territory. Now, I think each and every word, every phrase, every idiom that is being used has a tremendous amount of significance vis-a-vis our own border interests. He also goes on to say, we will safeguard every blade of grass and tree on the motherland border well. He doesn't mention a threat from India or about India, but he also talks about, and this is a sort of very well choreographed exercise. He talks about these two Tibetan sisters, and then he talks about saving their homeland, etc. Following this, he's delivered a speech at the 19th Party Congress, And this was soon after the incidents in the Doklam Plateau, where he dropped hints of what was to come, as he mentioned, border areas and minorities multiple times in his speech. It also talked about promising to accelerate development and improve defenses and ensure stability and security. Later that year, the local CCP apparatus in Tibet launched the Xiaokang villages. As I mentioned, it's called the Well-Off Villages program, under which 628 villages were to be developed along China's frontier with India and Tibet, stretching from the Nari prefecture bordering Uttarakhand and Himachal to the Ningxi opposite Arunachal Pradesh. There are estimated to be about 62 odd thousand households in these villages, spread across 21 Himalayan border counties and home to around more than 200,000 residents. These villages are supposed to be inhabited by people loyal to the Chinese Communist Party and are intended to serve, as I'm quoting their word, as buffer with India and improve Beijing's control over these remote areas. It's part of the consolidation and stability process, which Xi Jinping has been harping on repeatedly in his speeches as far as the Indian border is concerned, and other borders too. The use of civilian resources such as herders, farmers, and fishing vessels for achieving military aims on land and sea have always been a part of China's doctrine in the past. It has used herders and graziers earlier too, to grazing pastures and to advance territorial claims in eastern Ladakh. We saw a similar thing in kind of tactics in the South China Seas. But unlike nomadic herders, some of the people being settled by Beijing in these villages are not ethnic Tibetans, but Han Chinese, and are meant to serve as permanent watch posts for the PLA. I think this is where the significance of today's topic really lies. It is perhaps the first time that a country has tried large-scale relocation of population to its border areas to assert its territorial claims. In August 2020, this is soon after the incidents in Galwan, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited the border areas, and he inspected the infrastructure of buildings and the construction of villages in that area. As we all know, Xi Jinping has made a visit recently into that very prefecture and also laid out some things. I'm not going to repeat what he has said or go into the speeches. I leave it to the galaxy of experts who are with us to be able to actually go into those details, examine them, and assess them, and in fact, enlighten all of us, I'm included in the audience, as to what the implication of this could be, not only for Tibet, the region, India. I think it's very important. So without further ado, let me once again, it's my pleasure and privilege as a trustee of the FNBA, hand this over to Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, who everybody I think knows. He's often on TV. He writes prolifically, one of the foremost experts on China and the regions around China in terms of, again, India's security interests, to kindly chair this session and introduce the speakers and take it from here. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing all of you. Over to Sri.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verma. Good evening to you all, or good evening where you're from. My colleagues at the FNVA, Mr. Tandon, Mrs. Ribon Banerjee, and the audience. Greetings to you all. As Mr. Verma had laid down, we are going to discuss the Xiaokang villages in a format where we have excellent speakers. Before I hand over this to Claude, the first speaker, may I ask that the speakers could elaborate on a few things. Out of these 628 villages, well-off society villages, it is said by the Tibetan newspapers that 604 villages have already been constructed. So by last year, so which means they must have completed all the 628 villages. It is said that 1/3 of these are close to the line of actual control. That's about more than 200 of these are closer to the line of actual control. So obviously the question of the Trans-Himalayan border areas will come into the picture. Can you please delve on this aspect? Secondly, the Chinese argument is that when they began in July 2017, the argument is that this is to manage well the settled population who are before scattered in different parts of the nearly 20 border counties in Tibet. So what is the implication of this? Can we term this, as some Tibetans have said, as defense villages? Can we term this as internment camps, like we saw in Xinjiang, where they have grouped people, nearly 1 million people in Xinjiang? So can we term this as an internment kind of a camp, these 100 or households that have been assembled in these 600 odd villages? Second, the Chinese argument is that this is for poverty alleviation. But in general, the poverty alleviation in China is related to rural areas, not to the urban areas. But because these villages look more like urban villages with facilities like internet, postal services, connectivity, it is said that they have laid down 130 roads. Almost about 3,080 kilometers of roads have been laid down, connecting these villages to the nearest counties, county headquarters, and so on. So can we term this as, in terms of the poverty alleviation, can we look at these as purely villages, or in terms of the urban areas where the poverty alleviation programs have not yet been touched by the Chinese government? Thirdly, the Chinese argument is that this is to settle people in the border areas for their legitimization. Xi Jinping's letter, as Mr. Verma had mentioned, the motherland, prosperity, and so on and so forth. So, in terms of this multinational kind of legitimization, what are the problems that we may come across? Would you please elaborate on this? Fourthly, there is, in the Tibetan press, they mentioned about the splitism of the Dalai Lama, and some of these villages appear to be to prepare the ground for the anti-infiltration, as some of the reports in Tibet mentioned. Because some of these villages are on the way where the Dalai Lama's flight took place in 1959. And these are frequently visited places by the people in the Trans-Himalayan region. So to what extent will that affect the 15th Dalai Lama succession issue, these villages? Another issue is obviously the demographic change that China is intending to bring in with this. So what kind of pro-establishment elements will be in charge of these? It is said that there will be a few party members, at least one party member among these in every village, and they would obviously be doing the party work, Communist Party's work. So what kind of activities we could visualize from the Communist Party point of view? Then, of course, obviously, there is the, Mr. Verma mentioned about the impact that it can have on the defenses of India. Finally, I would also request the speakers to look at the significance of Wang Haiqiang, who was appointed as the commander of the Western Theater Command recently, a fortnight ago. Now, in 2017, Wang Haiqiang began the Xiaokang villages. And he is in touch with the party secretary in Tibet, party secretary in Xinjiang, Chen Chuanko and Wu Inchie. So we see a new model here, the political as well as military within China, bridging together in order to push through these defense establishments, if those villages can be termed as such. So what is the impact of Wang Haiqiang's appointment? He is 58, 59, so retirement age is 65. So he has 6-7 years more. And the previous commander, Chao Chung-chi, has been appointed as the deputy head in the National People's Congress Foreign Affairs Committee. So there is a full backing from the party state for Wang Haiqiang. So what would be the impact of the military backup for these villages? So without much ado, let me request the speakers to bring forth some of these issues. Let me request first Claude Arpi. He has written multi-voluminous works on Tibet and over 2,000 articles, opinion pieces, and academic policy related. So we could not have expected a better speaker to kickstart this discussion. He had been tracking Tibet substantially. So over to you, Claude.
Thank you, Xiaokang. Thank you, Mr. Verma. I want to say first hello to my young friend, Mr. Tandon. I'm very happy to see him here and in good health. So I wish him in advance for his 90th birthday a very, very good health and a very, very long life. So, and thank you, Reban, also for inviting me. Now, the title of my presentation is Mingling Like Pomegranate Seeds. This term, pomegranate seeds, has been used by Xi Jinping time and again since about 10 years. And it means the ethnic minorities and the Han majority in China should be like pomegranate seeds. So it has a very serious implication for the Tibetan nation. And sometimes I regret that the Dharamsala, as well as the government of India, has not spent more time on this issue, which is very vital for their survival. And mingling is a term that also Xi Jinping has been using time again about ethnic minorities in Tibet, because they say there's so many minority ethnic groups in Tibet, though Tibetan are maybe more than 95%. And the Han population. And I think the entire concept of this village is for mingling and to get the Han and the minority in Tibet as a like the pomegranate seed. Now I'm showing that photo. Mr. Verma has spoken about Yume. Look at that. I don't know if the cursor of my mouse can show. There's a small camera. So I think it says it all, because one also of the issue would be to monitor very closely. I don't know how many people will live in this village. My estimate is between 1.5 and 1.8 lakh of people, but that's a very, very serious issue. The name Xiaokang has come from a village in Anhui province in 1978 after the Great Leap Forward, which saw maybe 50 million Chinese died of starvation, and the Cultural Revolution. The Chinese people had nothing to eat, so they, in that village, they signed a pact that they would decommunalize the land, and each villager, each of his 18 villagers would have a piece of land, and they would become richer, and they did. But I don't know why exactly it has been chosen that title for these villages. I think Mr. Verma has mentioned it. Building beautiful and happy Tibet and fulfilling the dream of a great rejuvenation, but it's a rejuvenation of China. It's not the rejuvenation of Tibet. And that term, happy Tibet, is coming time, every day, you can see on the Chinese TV, on the Lhasa TV, or on the newspaper, they speak about happiness and how happy are today the Tibetan. Maybe our friend in Dharamsala will not agree. I don't agree also. I don't think it's more propaganda, but that term happiness comes again and again. Now, I think this should go, that by building this village, China is killing many birds in one time. First, it was mentioned poverty alleviation and creating happiness. Second, protecting the border. That's what I've put in red. It's a propaganda. And building a wall of bronze and iron for ethnic unity, social stability, and national unity. That is the official motto and the official motivation of building this village. And of course, celebrating the 70 years of liberation of Tibet. But we could ask, if after 70 years there was so much poverty in Tibet, what has the Chinese done during this at least 65, 66 years since the time they started building these villages? Now, also you have to see it from another angle, from our angle in India as well, the world angle. They are developing dual border infrastructure. As you know, by law, China has to have all the infrastructure has to have dual use. Means if you do a road or if you do an airport, or if you research in a new plane, everything has to be dual use, means civilian and military. And they of course changing the demography of the border. They are monitoring the border population. You have seen that camera on that first slide. And recently they have started recruiting on a very large scale Tibetans in the PLA or in the paramilitary forces. And it has taken, I'll speak about it later, but I think to answer Professor Kondapalli's question about Wang Heichang, I think it is one of very important factor. And you should not see this village as just building villages. I think China has planned it very well to have so many different factors. I said killing many birds. And also one which we should not neglect in India is the creating envy among the border population. You have to remember that on the other side, the Mempa or the Mompa or the Mishmi or the Lopa tribes have their brother and sister on the other side of the McMahon line. So that's sort of the Xi Jinping, I think, even before it took over as in 2012 as a Secretary General and later on President, he said, govern the nation by governing the borders. Govern the border by first stabilizing Tibet, ensure social harmony and stability in Tibet, and strengthen the development of the border region. So that is a bold project of Xi Jinping to so-called stabilize the border, and it translates today by building these 604 villages. In my opinion, the decision was taken during the 6th Tibet Work Forum. As you're aware, every 5, 6, 7 years, about 250, 300 senior cadres. It includes the standing committee of the party, many members of the Central Committee. It includes the Central Military Commission. They meet for 2 days and they decide the future of Tibet. So at that time, poverty alleviation was the first target, but I think at that time, it's the decision of building this village took place, though it took 2 more years to start really building these villages. But my point is that when China decides something, they decide a new policy, it will become fully implemented by the end of the 5 years. So in August of 2020, the 7th Tibet Work Forum has taken place. So I think it's extremely important for us and for the Tibetan in particular, to look in detail of what was said and what was decided and what is the next policy, because otherwise we will be put in front of a fait accompli, like in the case of the 604 villages. Now we can't do anything about it. It has been done, and we start talking about it when it's done. So we should study in depth whatever we can from the 7th Tibet Work Forum. Wu Jingche, the party chief in Tibet, visited Yume in 2006. I like in the morning to take picture, to keep picture of this visit, but at that time I didn't realize at all why he was visiting that very remote place, though it's not very far from Azapila, one of the disputed places on the border on the McMahon line. It's about 30 kilometers from Azapila. So I didn't know, but as Mr. Varma said, 32 people. And the two ladies Mr. Varma mentioned, their father, in their father's time, there were 7-8 people living in these villages. So you have to realize that most of these villages have been created out of nowhere, or very, very small hamlet with very few people. And now it's really populating the entire Himalayan belt from Lorit sector to Demchok in Ladakh. The propaganda has given different names: the guardian of the sacred land and the builders of happy homes. And 2-3 days ago, I found that title, On the Road of Happiness. The day is as red as fire. There's no doubt about it. These Xiaokang villages are red, and the red flag will be on each and every house. As I show on the first slide, the people, whether they are Tibetan or Han or any other minority, they will have to respect the flag and follow Xi Jinping's saying. That message to Dorkar and Yangzon, the two Tibetan elders, has been read by Mr. Varma, so I will not come again to it. So it was 2 years after the 6th Work Forum. So and visit of Wu Jingche was 1 year after, and 2 years after they really started building this village. But you have to realize that in China, when the emperor, when Xi Jinping, which is today the equal of Mao Zedong, adopt a village, the entire party will follow and will. That's why you get hundreds of articles, of TV program, of film on Yume, that first village which was built north of Upper Subansari district of. And not only that, that lady has become a very big star in China. She got the first July medal on the 100 years of the big function in the Great Hall of People in Beijing. She was called by Xi Jinping, and she's one of the 25 or 30, I cannot say Chinese, but she's Tibetan, who was honored by Xi Jinping himself. And that small village where 2-3 houses, 32 people, today as a police station, as a school. Today morning there was a TV program on the Chinese TV of Lhasa showing the school, how happy they were, but all the teachers were Chinese, and they have very good communication, they have very good Wi-Fi, and some of these villages have 5G, and this area is a very, very, particularly Yume, is a very strategic area because very close to the McMahon line. And as mentioned, Azapila is one of the disputed places where not clashes but encounter took place regularly between the PLA and the Indian Army. So they're entering the Indian territory very often. And the other place, which is in the same area, which is also disputed, but on which a village has been built, is Longzhou, who in August of 1959 was the first place where a clash took place between the PLA and the Indian Army. And after that, India stopped patrolling. That's why they were able to do a village. village. Incidentally, the Yume, it was very famous in Tibet. It was one of the two major pilgrimages with the Kailash Yatra, the Parikrama of the Kailash. Here there was every 12 years, there was the Yume, the Tsari pilgrimage around the Dakpacheri mountain. And Yume was famous because it was the end of the pilgrimage, and there was a very famous old Gompa. But I have seen tens of movies, I've read hundreds of articles on Yume, I've never heard about that Gompa. I think it just says what's going to happen in all these villages. There will be no religious activity permitted. Now, Longju, I mentioned, it's few kilometers inside India's territory. Of course, China is saying it's its own territory. As you're aware, the border discussion have never been arrived at any solution, so it will go on like that. But I think some of the speakers will speak about the villages in Bhutan, but they have done a big village. But it's out of nowhere because there was no village. I read the whole report of the assistant political officer in the 50s. For the first time in 57, one Indian officer went that place. There was one or two huts. Today it's a village. So it means that the entire population is brought from outside. And it has serious implication for India because it's inside India's territory. But the multiplication of all these villages, Professor Kondabale mentioned the route that the Dalai Lama took when in March of 1959 he entered Kanzimane and Chutangmo, entered India. Only in that area in Sona County, there is 9 of these Xiaokang village. I've counted 9. So actually nobody has ever done really a mapping of these villages. It should be done. But it has serious implication because China is bringing tourism. Now, to be sustainable, these villages need revenue. And one of the revenue is tourism, homestay. 6 lakhs of people have been lifted out of poverty, but it means that these people were poor and I would not say starving, but were extremely poor 65 years, 67 years after the so-called liberation of Tibet. And now officially they say that 604 villages have been completed, and Mr. Varma mentioned the new roads. And again, these roads are all dual roads. And when Xi Jinping speaks of mingling, he speaks about the different ethnic groups, but also of fusion. He speaks fusion means that the PLA, or at least the Border Defense Forces and the paramilitary force, the PAP, who are manning the border, will work very, very closely with these villages. So when they do this 130 new road, they are for both, for the army, for the defense forces, for the border defense forces, for the PAP, as well as for the village. And as I mentioned, very good facility for mobile communication, which is not always the case, which is often not the case on our side in India, in Arunachal Pradesh, or in Ladakh, or in Uttarakhand. Many of these villages have seen relocation of people also. Part of the scheme is to relocate people, either farmers or nomad, Dokpa, they relocate them. And we have seen many convoy of buses coming sometimes from far away from Nakchu. The pretext given by the Chinese government is that some area like Nakchu is very high, and Tibetans are lacking oxygen. Oxygen has been an obsession for China, especially after the confrontation in Ladakh, where they saw their own people were absolutely not able to manage without oxygen, while the Ladakh scouts or the SFF, the Tibetan army, was regiment was able to manage much better. So relocation is part of also of the scheme to bring other Tibetans from a different way of life and to bring them to these villages. I don't know how they are selected, but it's partly Tibetan and partly Han. When you look at the name of the people who are interviewed in these villages, many are Han Chinese. And one place like Metok, which is the main county north of Upper Siang district of Arunachal, it was a small, tiny village. It has become a big town now. And they say the first time the tunnel was opened in 2013, 30 or 40,000 Han Chinese visitors came. And you see the Chinese tourists will get a picture or a selfie in that beautiful surrounding. That man was a hunter. All these local people, tribes have been hunting. Now he's a tourist guide. He said he has built a nice hotel. He was interviewed, but he's still missing the hunting. And one more village, which is north of Sikkim. You must have read in the newspaper in Naku Pass, there was some friction between the PLA and the Indian army. The Chinese had come a few kilometers inside the Indian territory in one place which is supposed to be very well delimited. There is not really issue of demarcation, but they crossed the Nakula. So very nearby, there's one village called Geru. And these villages come out of nowhere again, and they are mainly to man the border. And it was visited by the Chinese Panchen Lama. You know that China has recognized its own Panchen Lama, who incidentally was not seen during the visit of Xi Jinping and Wang Yang and other Chinese directory. He was seen very briefly. And during Xi Jinping's visit, he was not here at all, but during Wang Yang, he was seen briefly. So it means that even that boy that the Chinese selected, they don't trust him. That's a big issue, and that will, when I come to the PLA and recruitment of Tibetans, it also will be a main issue. Now, totally the other side, on the other side of the Kailash range, very close to Rutok, between Rutok and Demchok, there's a village called Xiaokang. Again, they take their own Panchen Lama, and it's more for a photo op. And he comes for a few hours, he goes, and on the next day in the papers, there's TV films and articles and photos circulating. But once again, I think they don't trust him very much. Something interesting, nationalist tourism and this Xiaokang village. The first one is Rima. Rima is in the Lohit sector. It's north of Kibutu. They have done a memorial. Probably some of the people who died during the Walong battle in '62, but also people who died by building the roads in 1951, 52, 53, the first road from Chando to the Lohit sector. Many people died. And Chedala, the head of the government, the governor of Tibet, Tibetan from Yunnan, inaugurated that monument. Here you have 1962, General Changhua, who was the commander of the Chinese force during the war with India. They have opened his tactical headquarters just north of Kenzimane, which is the border where the Dalai Lama crossed. Professor Kondapalli mentioned it. So they use also national tourism, nationalist tourism. Xi Jinping's visit has been mentioned, but 6 members of the Politburo were accompanying him, and 5 plus Xi Jinping 6. And later on, 5 other members of the Politburo visited Tibet in 2 months, including Wang Yang, the number 4, and the CPCC chairman. And I think these visits are mostly linked with what they are going to do during the next 5 years, what has been decided in August 2020 during the 7th Work Forum. Xi Jinping visited the border. I think it was very important because China has big plans on the border. So according to the reports, he was briefed in detail. And on that map, there's ecological map of southern Tibet, of the entire Tibetan autonomous region, but all the detail of the different reserve and whatever China is doing for the ecology of the Yalong Tsampo or the tributary of the Yalong Tsampo. These also, Xi Jinping was accompanied by one of the vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, General Yang Shuxia. I think he had very detailed discussion about the situation on the border. But that visit of Xi Jinping is so important that now it's 1.5 months, but every day everyone repeats the words of that Xi Jinping has said. Like Mr. Varma was reading that letter of Xi Jinping. When he writes a letter or when he gives a speech, sometimes a very small speech, 1 minute, 2 minutes, his words will become gospel and repeated by each and every cadre, small cadre on the border or a bigger cadre like Ujinche or Chedala or Lobsang Yatsen in Lhasa. Now, a very, very serious issue for India is that Giga hydropower plant that China has announced they will start the surveying and doing it. In the press, in Indian press, is always mentioned as a mega dam. It's not a mega dam. It will be about 10 different hydropower plant and totaling 60 or 70 gigawatt, means 3 times the size or the production of the Three Gorges Dam, which is the most important. And as you say, Shillong is a border here. It's very close, about the terminal Drepung or Beshong, they call China. It's about 25 kilometers from the Upper Siang district of Geling, Tuting, Bishing of Arunachal Pradesh. And at the same time, you have to see as holistic, not only the villages, but also they are doing 3 new airports, one in Lunse, one in Purang, and one in Tingri. All this is linked. It's not one side the villages, one side the airport, one side the new train which is going from Ningxi to Lhasa. It's a global plan that China has decided in 2015 that they have started implemented, and now they will implement what they have decided in August of 2020. I mentioned briefly, but I think that was a very, very big meeting, and there is no doubt that the situation on the border, any plan, there's more than there was at that time. General Wang Heijian had not taken over, so Xu Jinling was still the commander of the Western Theater Command, and there was about 25-30 major generals, among them 2 Tibetans. It's more for the show, General Thupten Tinle and General Namang Sonam, but they all met Xi Jinping, and they probably long meeting. I mean, we don't know what will happen during this meeting, but also the Air Force generals were there, and the border was discussed mostly in detail. Now, recruiting and that fusion that I mentioned earlier, Xi Jinping wants to fusion the civilian and the military, not only for infrastructure, for R&D, for also on the human level. And they discovered that the Tibetan know better the border than them, and they, for recce, for transportation, they can be used. And that first photo is 2017. So already the border defense force were patrolling along with some civilians. it's only 2 years ago that I think the recruiting started. And it has taken a very, very much larger dimension after August 1920, when the Kailash range in Ladakh overseeing the Pangong Tso was taken by the Special Frontier Force, the Establishment 22. And recently, the Sikyong Pemba Tselna has inaugurated a statue of Nima Tenzing, the Tibetan officer who unfortunately died on that night of 28th of August 1920. But I think it has triggered something in China. Suddenly, they say, their propaganda say that we have liberated the Tibetans. Now they are happy, they are free. But on the other side, they see the Tibetans fighting for India and winning such important strategic posts. So since then, large scale recruitment has taken place, either in the militia. Of course, for the Tibetan, it's easier, at least to serve in the militia, in the sense that they do ordinary jobs and or firefighter or things like that, and they don't have to fight directly on the border. For the PLA, it's more difficult, but that is, I have translated what is written on that poster, and every year about 200-300 Tibetans were inducted in the PLA, but that was before that it started on a much larger scale, and particularly in the Xiaokang village on the border, where according to some sources, each family should give one person. Like traditionally, each family in Tibet would give one person to the monastery. Today, they have to give to the PLA. When I speak of the PLA, it can be the militia or the border defense forces or the PAP, the People's Armed Police. And they went extensively, they sent teams all over the border, preaching teams, they call them preaching teams, to open classroom to ensure national defense education, strengthen the nation, and brings awareness for jointly guarding the border. With the continuous advancement of preaching squad, the national defense awareness of herdsmen continue to increase. It has become the norm for the military and civilian to join hands to defend the border. So the ultimate objective is to this jointness, this fusion between the military. It doesn't mean that it will work. They are proposing very good salary probably. They're doing a lot of propaganda. Like they find always beautiful girls who are joining and sniper and things like that. I don't know if that girl is really a sniper and all, but if Tibetan needs money, sometimes they may be tempted. It doesn't mean that they will fight immediately against Indian army, or it doesn't mean also that they will be able to start a regiment like the Special Frontier Force in India, because to get special force, it's not done in one day, it's not done in 1 year. It will take a lot of time, and also you have to trust the people that you're using in the special forces. And I think that is a case that they really not trusting fully the Tibetans. And I think it's enough one day, one word from Dharamsala comes, and these people may change side. Promoting the culture of the tribes, I mentioned it already. They have this Lopa TV. They have a lot of articles, a lot of photo op films mentioning the culture of the Mempa, of the Mompa, of the Lopa, Abodani tribes, Mishmi, and I think it has some influence on the border population because usually many of these villages on India side do not have proper telecom facilities, do not have proper roads. Like one village, Taksin in Upper Subanzari, it took years, only last year or this year that road was open. They had to walk 4 days. Recently again, when there was the inoculation for the vaccination for the virus, some of the district medical officers had to walk 3-4 days in Mago circle of Tabong district. So marrying Tibetan, now they have done a lot of articles and mentioning this. Very often is Tibetan girl marrying Chinese boy. You have to understand that when they do this mega project, they have not started the hydropower mega one, but they have started roads. They have started building this road. You need construction workers. Many of these construction workers will remain there and will marry girls. And if they are encouraged, if you look at 70 years, in the early 50s when China came, they tried, mainly in Yatong, in areas like that, in Gyantse, they tried that this mingling, this intermarriage. It never worked. But now, the situation has changed, and with tens of thousands of workers coming from, or engineers coming from the mainland, there'll be more pressure for marrying Tibetan. And just to conclude, because I think I have spoken too much, I think what can India do? India had that philosophy of Nifa in the 50s. India wanted to keep the tribes as they are, like good savage, and it didn't work because the defense of the border was neglected in the process. Today it's time to remove this inner line permit. It's from 1873 Bengal Eastern Frontier Regulation. It mainly deals with elephants coming, or the tribes coming and raiding the tea gardens, or the tea garden people wanting to go to the border without permission. So now we have seen with the COVID, it's so easy to have e-pass, and if there is need of an inner line permit, it has been removed 2 weeks ago in many places in Ladakh, but I don't think it's needed for Arunachal too. But if it's needed, e-passes could be very easily issued, and you have machine to check these passes, and that's all. But to put inner line, it means there's an inner line, means India is not sure that the north of the inner line it's Indian territory. So why to put the inner line? This should be immediately removed, this inner line, give another name, put e-passes, do whatever is required, but not inner line. Stop the immigration of the border. Last week, there was a meeting of all the MLA of Arunachal, realizing that the same thing that is happening in Uttarakhand is happening in Arunachal. People going to Itanagar, or going to Guwahati, or going to Tezpur, or to Meghalaya, and all the villages are empty. So one side, China is building villages and putting nearly 2 lakhs of people, and on the Indian side, all the villages are being empty. Develop the border infrastructure, road, telecommunication. It's been done since 2-3 years. It has started on very large scale, but it should really continue and go a little bit faster. Develop income generating, homestay, horticulture, floriculture. Some guys from the border sometimes send me WhatsApp with photos of the most extraordinary flowers or fruits. This should be used, but they need the road and they need the basic thing. And promote the culture and belief of this population. Each of these tribe of Arunachal do films, regular films. You do like China, you send vloggers and do a short film. And also the army ITBTS to work with the local people. It has been started. I was so happy on July 6th for His Holiness' birthday. In many of the villages in Ladakh, in Koyul, Anle, Dungti, and other villages, they celebrated the Dalai Lama's birthday. And recently they did a Nomad Festival. All the nomad of Ladakh gather for 2 days, dancing and having a little chang or a lot of chang and having fun together. And also develop the religious place, the cultural place. Now, on the top of Denchok, there is one mountain which is called Chota Kailash, which dominates, and you can see from that top of the mountain the Chinese town of Denchok and Tashigang. Recently, the army and the monastery, the Dokpa, have put a statue of the deity Denchok. In Arunachal, the army and the state government has developed these holy falls, 108 waterfalls, which were visited by Guru Padmasambhava. So this is now open to people to visit. But it should be done in a very large scale, and India should not be shy. When I say India, I'm speaking the state government also, to show that this place belongs to India, and if Indian visitors want to go, they can go. And finally, by doing this village along the Mak Mountain line, there's more village along the north of the Mak Mountain line than in Ladakh, Nari sector, but somehow they keep saying it's a border. So while their claim is at the foothills, somehow I feel they are also demarcating the border. Okay, one place, Longchu, they have crossed the line, but other place they are on the other side. So indirectly, they are accepting that their claim line on the foothills is not, and they speak about border villages, no? And the last slide. Do Tibetan trust the party, and do China trust the Tibetans? That is a big question that I leave to the others to answer. But I doubt, and especially if they want to raise a regiment like the Special Frontier Force, they will have a lot of problems. But they will try their best. In the meantime, they'll use the Tibetan for work like Reiki or transportation and like that, but not fully for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've not taken too much time. Little bit, maybe stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Claude. That's a very comprehensive coverage of the Xiaokang villages. In the Tibetan press, they mentioned that while constructing these villages, they have to give the contract, and like in India, you have also the least quotation, L1, L2 type of things, and in most of these quotations, the public works department, the local public works department comes second, but the richest villager in that locality, in that county, wins the contract. So there is also a lot of corruption in these Xiaokang villages construction. It invariably goes to the richest person in that county. If you would have noticed that distinction here. So in other words, there is also the capital coming from Shanghai or Shenzhen or other places. So integration of all these, I think, is a one element. Also, you did mention about the villages being constructed in the other countries, Bhutan, the Pangta village, and in Nepal, where you have the Nepalese accusing China of demolishing the border markers recently, or in India, as you mentioned, in Lungchu. So there is an issue there, controversial issue in terms of the cross-border. Let's move on to our next speaker. The focus of the next speaker is on Tibet and Himalayas in the background of the Xiaokang villages. Dr. Sevang Dorji, he is working at the TPI, Tibet Policy Institute in Dharamshala. He has a PhD in international relations, and his work on Tibet and Himalayas is well known. So let's listen to Dr. Dorji. Over to you.
Good evening, sir. I'm honorable, sir. My presentation is mainly focused on the Chinese narrative and what is all about the Xiaokang, and also how China perceives the Xiaokang is all about. Therefore, the entire information what I gather here is based on the Chinese document. Today, my presentation topic is China's expansion of border defense village in the Indo-Tibet border, and taking Chonazong as a sample for that. With this, I begin my presentation. The Xiaokang in the Chinese way of village, it is in Tibetan Joting, which means middle class. This social economic developmental society is introduced by Deng Xiaoping. The term Xiaokang literally means small comfort. It is first emerged around 2000 years ago in the Chinese classic book of songs and rates. So these both of these books are China's classic. According to these Chinese classic sources, the Xiaokang is a social state in which people lead a fairly comfortable life. This concept became a key word for Deng Xiaoping's pro-growth ambitions for China. The Deng Xiaoping suggests that Xiaokang society is a goal and essence of China's own modernization. The idea implies certain degree of social equality where the pocket of poverty are entirely removed and all citizens can be moderately prosperous. While the English translation mainly emphasizes the wealth as sole target of the Xiaokang, the Chinese party state has seems to portray Xiaokang society as possessing overall welfare in terms of culture, environment, education, and income equally. So it was in December 1979 when Deng Xiaoping met with the Japanese Prime Minister Masahiro. The Deng Xiaoping said to him in court, the modernization what China wants to achieve are Chinese characteristic of modernization. The Chinese modernization concept is not like your modernization concept. It is the Chinese way of well-off home. In March 1984, the Xi Jinping pointed out hot raffling per capita GDP reached $800 is end of the century to build a well-off society in China. At the time, the well-off society that Xi Jinping talking about was to be reached $800 as per capital GDP. By 2000, as per capital GDP reached around $850, which reached the standard of a well-off society as described by Deng Xiaoping. But in 2002, the report of the 16th National Congress of the Communist Party of China pointed out that China's current well-off society is still low level, incomplete, and unevenly developed well-off society. Therefore, the Communist Party of China decided to focus on comprehensively building of well-off society, which we used to call Xiaokang, in terms of higher standard for benefiting more than 100 billion people. During the 18th National Congress of China's Communist Party officially proposed the strategic development of the building well-off society in all respects by 2020, and target it as the first centenary goal. Therefore, 2020 is the year of completion of the Xiaokang across the China. So with this background, I will go to my topic, which is the Chinese expansion Xiaokang in the Indo-Tibet border. So I'm taking China as a sample. for this. Since the 19th Party Congress in October 2017, Chinese President Xi Jinping has directed the extra attention paid by the Chinese Communist Party leadership to building a more comprehensive security structure in Tibetan Autonomous Region. The new architecture strengthened the present security apparatus already placed and combined it with the President Xi Jinping's new initiative of model Xiaokang, the border village. It is part of the President Xi Jinping's nationwide agenda for poverty alleviation, which is split out at the 19th Party Congress. The Xiaokang border defense village are also intended to create a strategic buffer inhabited by the people, especially in terms of Indo-Tibet border, to lower the CCP and nation. Here, nation refers to the China. They will act as a watch post along the border, help prevention infiltration. Here, infiltration refers to the return of the exiled Tibetans to China or Tibet. Xi Jinping's personal letter on the eve of the 19th Party Congress to the two sister residents in Yumi village of Hunjit country, whose administrative boundary in official Chinese map includes the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, initiated a new and important security program centering on the border. Since the border development and border expansion project, so-called Model Xiaokang border defense village across the Indo-Tibet border region. Moreover, during the 6th and 7th Tibet Work Forum, Xi Jinping directed the Chinese governing strategy of Tibet, which is well known that China must adhere to strategic thinking that to govern the nation, we must govern our border. To govern our border, we must first stabilize Tibet. So here, the Xi Jinping is talking about stabilizing Tibet. In order to stabilize Tibet, he meant to defend the border. So to govern the border well, therefore, the border development, border expansion, border security are key to ensure what Xi Jinping means to achieve his goal. In this context, the building model border defense village are crucial for China's national security and national integrity. Chinese authority has reviewed 628 model well of border defense village, which building in 21 Tibet's border region counties, which stretch from Ngari region to the Jayu opposite of Indian the state of Arunachal Pradesh. These border defense villages are to be constructed within 3 years or by 2021. So far, there are 604 border defense border are constructed. The aim of building the border defense village is to ensure the consolidation of the border area, border security. It is aligning high sense of political responsibility and historical mission with the masses of the border region and the party committee. Article in China's Agricultural Economic on December 18, 2017 gives detail about model well of border villages, which describe Tibet as the forefront of the national security barrier and the Tibet border as the most impoverished area in China. Article also said that Tibet well of border defense village will involve 62,160 households with a total of 240,000 people. They will provide it with the 10 amenities, namely water, electricity, road, communication, network here the broadcasting, postal network, finance service network, teaching, science, literature, health, insurance. All well of border will be accessed by the metal road. This is the that China is going to be give infrastructure. This model village of border defense appear to have selected for their remote location, where is space, population, potential location for facilitating trans-border movement, and pro-condition. The important role of the residents in these border villages is to keep eyes on the movement of population and activity across the border. Let's take Chona as a symbol for China's expansion of border defense village in Indo-Tibet border region. So here the Chona country is geopolitically very significant. By expanding Xiaokang villages in Chona country, it has obviously the geopolitical implication to India, as Claude has already mentioned, and so I don't need to go detail about that. So the Chona country is in the Lunzi. It's one of the model of border villages. The Lunzi country has rebuilt one village and started reconstruction of 4 new Xiaokang border village, including Dangna, Sambat village, as well as they invest 120 million the Chinese currency, which is called yuan. The Chona is located in the southern foothill of the Eastern Himalaya. It has 268 kilometers along border, which share with the Bhutan to the west and India to the south. The Chona is counting for 42.5% of the total border of the Hoka city. In Chinese, it is called the Shenan. In this context, Chona is important border region. It has jurisdiction over 9 townships, 1 town, and 25 administrative villages, which total population is 15,356, including 13,222 farmers and herdsmen. Lekpu village is one of the model well-off village in Chona. It is located in the southmost of the Chona country. It administers 4 townships of less than ethnic groups, which include Mama Memba, Liba, Gungri, and Li. With this, there are 243 households of 679 residents. This is also the core area of the tourism development of Chona country, which is known as the natural oxygen bar. In 2017, the Tibet Autonomous Region issued a plan for construction of villages in the border area of the Tibet Autonomous Region, and decided to review 6,028 first and second line administrative village in the border region, including 426 first line village, 201 second line village, and a Zayu farm. The implementation of the construction of village mainly focused on improving production, living condition of border residents in 10 aspects, including water, electricity, road, education, science, culture, sanitation, which is involving 62 border residents. The first batch of the border village in the Hoka city to start construction. The villagers in Li moved to their new house in 2018. 62 years old, the villager Guru of Chona, he gave interview to the the Global Times reporter. What he interviewed is that in court, the new house has 1 floor for his own home, the second floor opens supermarket, and third and fourth floor serves as the farmhouse and guest room. Only supermarket and tourism are available. The annual income is nearly 1 lakh Chinese currency, which is called yuan. I don't know whether this is exaggerated or true, but we don't have the access to verify this statement. And another report said that such change have not only occurred in Li Township, but also it has happened in Liba Township, Mama Township, and Gungri Township in the Lekpo in recent years. Through the construction of well-off village on the border, they have achieved a quality lift in the living standard of residents. The recent years, the local city's infrastructure investment has increased from 14.5 billion yen in 2015 to 21.08 billion yen in 2019. According to the data provided by the local city government department, the road axis, the rate is 556 organized village in the city has reached 99.82%. According to data released by the Transportation Department of the Tibet Autonomous Region, at the year of 2020, the rate of the Hidden Road in qualified township and organic village in the region reached 86%. For most of the Tibetans, road is no longer the big obstacle to poverty alleviation and development. So this is it was another report. The significance of road to border construction lies not only in the livelihood of the people, but villages scattered across the border for thousands of kilometers are also connected by road to form a chain of solid and stable edge. Taking a local city as example, there are two important roads: 219 National Highway Road and 560 National Road passing through the city. The Secretary of Party Leadership Group and Deputy Director of the Department and Reform Commission of the local city, told Global Times reporter that National Highway 219 connects the outermost ring of the Tibet border region, and it runs many border countries. In the eyes of the local, infrastructure connection has promoted the development of the border area in Tibet. It is a manifestation of the equal attention to strengthening and prospering the border. And the Deputy Secretary of the Country Party Committee and County Mayor of Sona district told a reporter that Sona County planned to relocate 2,222 people from 960 households on the border by identifying weak areas, disputed areas, and blank spots. He also introduced the people moved to border and the living places are less than 2 kilometers away from the line of actual control. It means to the Indo-Tibet border. He also mentioned that in the past 10 years, the population of Lepo in Sona County has shown negative growth, with the residents relocating from time to time. The border force has been weakened. The achievement of the border relocation plan is also responding to such problem. A member villager in the Lepo town told the Global Times reporter, the Indian personnel sometimes paint the Indian flag on the tree. When we see it, we dig out this part and we paint the Chinese flag. And at the end, there are two types of building well of border defense village. The one is building in a border region, and another is at the border line. So this is very important that mostly we are talking about like Xiaokang, but we didn't differentiate what kind of the China is constructing the border villages. The one is constructing in the border region, the another is constructing on the border line. So the constructing the Xiaokang in the border line, which India has, these things. India has defense concerns and implication. So those who are relocating in borderline village, the family has to pay just 20%, and the remaining 80% by the Chinese authority. Those who are relocating in the border region, so one has to pay 30%, the rest of the pay by the authority. So cost of one household is 4 lakh Chinese currency. So at this, and so here in China, at the latest information what we receive is that the China is constructing the Xiaokang village, which is called Dijung village. In Dijung village, so far, China is relocating 1,429 people in this Dijung village, which we used to call the borderline village. So with this, I would like to end my presentation, but most of my presentation is condensed the data and the Chinese these things. I think it's not the kind of thing that normally we used to tell. So sometimes like they are saying that if you fight with enemy, you have to know enemy well. So therefore, like it's very important for me to understand what China is telling is all about. According to that, we have to the prepared answer. And I have two impressions regarding the presentation, which is based on the Chinese document. The first presentation is that whatever China says all about in their own, the narrative, whether it's Chinese propaganda or whether it is Chinese way of saying. In fact, the building Xiaokang villages in Indo-Tibet border is another sign of the Chinese expansionist the policy in Himalaya and South Asia. So this is with here, I would like to conclude. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dorji. And I think it is you have created that Chinese narrative deconstruction on the Xiaokang villages. You mentioned about a few statistics related to income and so on. Premier Li Keqiang mentioned that 600 million Chinese live with $140 as their income. So when we take the population including in Tibet, this comes to less than $140. The Tibet GDP is about $20 billion and per capita income is said to be about $1,000, while China's per capita income is about $10,000. So the figures of income of that person in Sonajung, I think would be incredible if those figures are real. But a larger question that I have for you as well as for other eminent speakers is, once I was in a conference in Tokyo and one of the speakers was from East-West Center Honolulu, and he had identified the various counties, villages. Counties are something like our tehsils or mandals, and the demographic changes that were happening, that's happening in many of these places. So are we doing research? TPI is doing research of that sort, identifying all the 7 prefectures and the 21 counties, border counties, identifying the demographic changes in all these villages. Who are these people who are migrating to these villages? Do we have a list of all this? Do we have a study, demographic study on these? What is the impact on Tibet, Tibetan environment, Tibetan population, Tibetan income? Is the TPI or any other specialized institution doing this kind of a study? If not, we have to go ahead with that kind. Thank you very much, Dr. Dorji. And the next speaker is Colonel Vinayak. He was a former Indian Army officer from the interpreter. He used to interpret for the Indian Army, but specializes mostly on the satellites, and we have had an interaction before on this. So his focus is on the PLA and the Pakistani Army, but fantastic satellite photographs that he had mentioned during the Doklam incident as well as in Galwan incident. Over to you, Colonel Bhatt.
Thank you very much, Professor Kondapalli, and I must thank the FNVA and Ms. Regon for inviting me. I'm really honored to join this distinguished panel. One thing I must mention about Claude RP had said, Xiaokang villages, he mentioned, the one which is in Anhui, that is a different Xiaokang. That is, the spelling is different. Xiaokang is, the Kang is with a G. And here what we are talking about is Xiaokang. It is with a K. The spellings and the Chinese characters are also different. I'll just tell you what had happened in that Anhui province of China. In 1978, when Deng Xiaoping had come into power, some of the people felt that the commune land is not being tilled properly and the productivity is going down. So 18 of them got together and made a pact, and that pact was a very serious one, in which if the things had gone bad, then the punishment was death. The death sentence was a punishment for that. So that is a different kind of a village, and that is a different kind of society which they brought up. It does have certain similarities with these Xiaokang villages that we are talking about. So that is one thing. And another thing which I noticed was the sniper, which Claude Arfi showed. She obviously is not a sniper. She is holding the rifle on her arm and not on her shoulder. So that is just not done in the army or anywhere else. Snipers hold the gun to their shoulders. The rifles are on the shoulder and not on the arm. So that is one difference. That is obviously photo operation and propaganda material. Okay, I'll share my screen and show you a few of my satellite images that I have collected. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these Xiaokang villages. The Xiaokang is a very, very typical Chinese theory, you know, like Dorji had mentioned, that it goes back to the 2nd century BC. And since then, things have been coming up. Everybody throughout this period had different ideas. Lao Tzu had said it is like retying the rope and using it. He expected the society to dress well, eat well, and follow the customs peacefully. Whereas Kongzi, Confucius, had a broader view. He said the elderly should be peaceful and live in peace. The middle-aged people should live as friends with integrity to each other. And the younger lot, the children, should be well cared for and very well educated. The same thing has transferred from that era to now with the socialism. Deng Xiaoping was the first one who raised this issue of Xiaokang villages. What his idea was to eradicate poverty, but prosper together. Everybody prospers with each other and achieve modernization along with that. What Jiang Zemin felt was the well-off society is a primary stage for socialism. And now what Xi Jinping is saying is a strong party is needed to have a well-off society. A strong leadership is the key to it. And in his speech on 1st of July, he mentioned it. He did say that Chinese have achieved the century-old goal of this Xiaokang society, that is well-off society. That is what he said on 1st of July. You can read it in Chinese. Once it is recorded and put up, then you can translate it also. So what is actually happening in all these villages? This is one place which everybody of us is very well aware of. Larungkar. This was the village which was one night suddenly set ablaze. And what happened later is history. Everybody has seen how people were dragged into buses, the families were dragged into buses and taken away from there. The Chinese CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, never wanted them to stay together in such villages where the influence of religion and His Holiness was overwhelming. So what they did was they shifted them 20 kilometers away in this particular village, which is obviously a Xiaokang village. You can see it very clearly. These are the new buildings which have come up after 2014. Some of them have come up in 2016 and some of them have come up in 2019 also. So this is what they're trying to do, a religious subjugation of the Tibetans through these villages. Here is a land grab which is happening in Bhutan, which we are very well aware of, slightly east of Doklam. We had seen the new Pangta villages, 2 of them coming up. There were 30 and 40 households which have come up there. I'll be showing later how they are constructing this particular village. This was the area which has been, the river has been reclaimed. They just not bothered about any ecology. Whatever the CCP is saying is all a lie. It is all propaganda. They're not bothered about the ecology of Tibet or any other place, anywhere in, even in South China Sea. They are going on with their aims, not bothered about what people are saying. So this is Pangta Phase 2 village. With here you really cannot see. It has come up later. So this is one place where Claude Arpi already explained this particular place. It is Mount Dakpa Sheri, which was supposed to be circumambulated just like Kailash. It is the second most religious place for the Tibetans and even for Hindus. Now Hindus have already forgotten about this. So this is the, on the east is, here you can see, this is the Saritou valley, and this is the Sari village, this is Longchu village, and the Yulmed Gompa. We'll see all of this when Claude said that he has not seen Yulmed Gompa. So I'll show it to you. I just made that particular slide also. So this is particularly the Yulmed village, and the red one is the Yulmed Gompa. This is the new one. The earlier Gompa was totally destroyed by the Chinese when they invaded Tibet in the 50s. Now recently they have constructed it. I think about 7 years ago they have constructed it. And this is the Sari model village. Our IB is supposed to pass through this particular village where I have shown the PLA post and the firing range. The IB really passes through that. So anything ahead of this, anything south of it is all occupied India by China. It is not even Tibet, it is India which is being occupied. So obviously Longchu and down below their posts are all occupied by China. It is Indian land. So this is the post, PLA post and firing range at Sari village. You can see it very clearly. This is the huge, It is a huge solid fence which has been constructed all around it. So that is what they fear even now. They do not trust the Tibetans, they actually fear them. And this is the place, Longchu, where they have reclaimed the left of the screen is the older image. The right one is the latest one of 2021. You can see the PLA post has come up in the reclaimed land. This is a close-up of the post. You can see it's a huge post. 4-storied buildings are there, and all of them must be occupied. This is the Saritou Valley Model Village, which was Claude has already alluded to it, so I'll not speak much about it. This is the Lipo Border Model Village, which I think Dorji mentioned it. These are all small villages where 25 to 30 small houses have been constructed by the Chinese. It is not much. The schools are not there. It is only the CCP, the main building here, the largest one, this one, is the CCP headquarters, and it is not a school. So obviously other facilities are not there. These are smaller houses, not like what the Chinese people have been claiming, like first floor this, second floor that. That is all propaganda. Nothing is there. These are very, very small villages, and the houses are also very small and congested. This is the Xiaokang village, which the photograph Claude RP showed, his first photograph with the video camera that he showed. This is the particular village. And this is what it looks like now. You can make out that it is a very small village. Hardly any population would be staying in it. Such villages are being constructed only around the border. Within, inside Tibet, not much of it is being constructed. So I really doubt whether they are constructing 628 villages. That was what was said by Huanqiu Delhi in 2017. They were the ones who raised this subject and claimed that 628, and out of that I think 421 were first line meaning very close to the border, and some 201 were supposed to be second line. So this is the Xiaokang village. This was constructed even before the Doklam crisis. 2012 there was nothing, and 2016 you can see the village has been constructed. This is one of the largest villages in the border areas. I have not seen such a large village. It has about 140 houses. So this is Meetok. There was nothing earlier in 2002, and now this is south of Meetok. Now they have a bridge coming across and a model village which has been constructed. What is happening here in all these villages, that the land ownership which was there, that has gone to the CCP. The people don't own anything here at all. This is Chayu, east of the eastern part of Arunachal Pradesh. It is opposite that. Chayu border model. Earlier there was nothing. Now you can see in 2016 they constructed this village. But if you see the latest imagery, the only difference you can see is the color of the hut. Nothing much has changed in that area after 2016. The roads obviously have become better. And this is lower Chayu, slightly north of that particular village. They have another Xiaokang village. which is again a very small one. Okay, this is the type of construction. This is the ground view of the Bhutan village which I showed you near Doklam. That is phase 1 Pangta village. This is constructed with only steel base. There is no cement used. Down below, obviously, cement would be used, but on the first floor, there is no cement. These are very, very temporary kind of houses which they have constructed. Steel trusses really don't last much. They will last for about 10 odd years, but they will be dangerous if more people are staying in those houses. It will be really dangerous. So we really don't know what exactly China is trying to do, whether it is trying to give them these houses or take land from them. They are also doing other activities, like these mountain signs are changing all over Tibet. They are using Romanized Tibetan or whatever they want to say in Chinese. You can see down below is written in Chinese. Top one is the same thing, Chu Sang Tawa Tang. That is what is written. And some new posters are coming up everywhere. So this is the poster which everybody has seen in Potala Palace grounds. There are posters inside monasteries also, where the Tibetan monks and tuluks are studying. There they are not allowed to post His Holiness's pictures anywhere. You will not see them anywhere inside. They are all Xi Jinping posters everywhere. Even outside in front of the houses, you have again these posters coming up, and inside also. Next to the altar, you see one side is Xi Jinping and one side is Mao Zedong. So whenever the Tibetans are praying, they are also seeing these leaders. So that is total subjugation of the Tibetans. And obviously the Kali beer and this Lao Chao and Mautai are flowing very freely. The younger generation are going to bars and all. So what is the aim of the CCP in all this? The main aim is Hanization of Tibet and other areas which have been occupied by the Chinese. They are inducting CCP cadres, like in 2006 when Xiaokang villages started coming up in Tibet. They inducted 20,000 CCP cadres those days. And similarly, anytime and every time this topic is coming up in their media, they are inducting more CCP cadres. The land grab is happening inside Bhutan, inside Nepal, inside India, as well as the land ownership is going to the CCP. It is not going to the Tibetans at all. They are also monetizing this land ownership. They're giving it to Chinese companies and making money out of it. Mining is happening, tunneling is happening. So much of mineral wealth is being taken out. The CCP claims that we brought in rails and roads. That is all for taking this mineral wealth out and bringing in Han Chinese and the PLA. That is what is exactly happening there. So what are the social effects? Obviously, religious subjugation is one. The ethnic, cultural and linguistic identity of Tibetans is slowly being wiped out totally. Today in Tibet, there are 1 lakh primary students who are studying in Chinese medium only. They're not studying Tibetan at all. So tomorrow, say after 20 years or so, they will forget the Tibetan language and they will know only the Chinese language. That is what China is trying to do. They claim that employment is being generated, but at what cost? The Chinese companies pay really pittance to all these Tibetans who are working with them. They are literally forced labor. They are not given any kind of concessions anywhere, except what the CCP claims on these houses, which is almost 30%, which is again taken out from their whatever employment they are gaining. Out of that, the money is being taken back by the government. So obviously, productivity of the government is increased, and that is what China is trying to show to the world, that our productivity, even in Tibet and Xinjiang, like cotton they were claiming in Xinjiang, that is increasing. That is really not true. What is happening is really oppression of the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. Security-wise, these Xiaokang villages are a gated community. Everybody, the herdsmen and all, they have been brought in and put in one place. They are able to do some kind of border defense and stopping of exploitation. What Professor Kondapalli was mentioning, the people who are trying to flee from the CCP and come to India, that would be monitored by these villages. Obviously, these villages would be having a large number of Han population, mostly Han population. They are also trying to do population control, that is change of demography literally, by shifting these herdsmen from Tibet to various provinces. They are sending them with the allurement that we will give you jobs where you will earn more and you will be able to sustain your children in a better way. Obviously, the poor fellow who is a herdsman, if he is given some kind of allurement, he is ready to go there outside, but he does not realize until he is already reached a new province in a new place where he has no control over what is happening back in Tibet. His children, his family, his elders are all left behind. And there again, both the people are in both the places are under pressure of the CCP. That is how CCP controls all this. So here I come to the end of my lecture. I would only say to conclude that India must ask for Eastern Ladakh back from China. It also must ask for Kailash Mansarovar and the areas surrounding, because till 1955, India was collecting taxes, and that is what in international community, internationally it is recognized that wherever you were collecting taxes, that area becomes yours. So till 1955, if we were collecting taxes from there, so that was our area. So we must ask for it back from China. And to do that, we must recognize Tibet. That is the main thing that Indian government somehow should do, take a strong step and recognize Tibet. And it should recognize the CTA as the valid and rightful government of the Tibetans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Bhatt, and that was a very enlightening. We saw the pictures of all those settlements, and seeing is believing. So let's move on to the next speaker, Mr. Matthew Achester. He is an independent researcher and translator working on modern Tibetan history. Mr. Matthew.
Thank you, Professor Kondapalli, and thanks to the organizers for having me here. I'm going to take the liberty of stepping aside slightly from the contemporary reality that we've just been looking at with the previous speakers, and going back a little bit on the history of the Indo-India-China border as it has become, because there is a lot of background in that history which should be appreciated. Perhaps many of you do appreciate it, but I think that there are some points which need emphasizing, and I'm going to briefly do that today. I mean, particularly what I'm referring to is the confrontation over the border, particularly the 1962 war, has been seen overwhelmingly and is described generally in the academic literature, in journalism, and in everyday perception as being something that has to do with Indian incompetence, mistakes that were made politically and militarily by the Indians in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And I think that this, sorely needs correcting with a greater appreciation of the events that led up to 1962 and thereafter on the Chinese side. And by those events, I primarily mean the PLA's counterinsurgency operations in Tibet following the 1959 uprising, which was the immediate precedent to the 1962 war. In order to discuss this briefly, as briefly as I can, I'm going to present an article by the exile Chinese historian Li Jianglin, which was published in 2017. And I've put the link to the article in the chat if anyone would like to pursue it. Li Jianglin is a researcher who's worked on the 5-year war, as she describes it, that was waged against Tibet to eliminate the Tibetan resistance using exclusively official Chinese sources. A part of the reason why this history has not been appreciated is because these official Chinese sources are very hard to access and very incomplete, but at least this is a start. So just to summarize the content of the article and the background that I'm referring to, I would say the following. After crushing the Lhasa uprising in March 1959, the PLA launched a full-scale military operation to suppress rebellion. That's the Chinese term for that operation. In central and western Tibet, the operations in eastern Tibet had been going on for several years before that, but I'm not going to cover that now. Just in central and western Tibet after March 1959, something like 200,000 troops were deployed on the ground. Some of them were veterans, battle-hardened units, veterans of the Korean War, and the PLAAF, the PLA Air Force, which tested out for the first time its newly acquired Soviet bombers on civilian populations in Tibet. This level of deployment would have been disproportionate even against Tibet's standing army, which the PLA had easily defeated at Chamdo in 1950. The enemy at this point, as it was called, was scattered groups of unorganized, untrained, poorly armed militia who were mostly fleeing with their families and their livestock. It's true that some modern weapons and equipment had been airdropped by the CIA, but nothing like enough to present a serious military challenge. The question that Jianglin poses in this article is, why was such disproportionate force used? It's well known that Mao, in particular, welcomed the outbreak of resistance in Tibet as an opportunity to, quote, strike at our enemies, and to bring the temporary political cohabitation which had been set up by the 17-point agreement to an end in order to speed up socialist reform and fully assimilate the territory of Tibet into China. It has not been well appreciated, however, that the crushing of the so-called counter-revolutionary rebellion after 1959 was also welcomed as an opportunity to train the PLA and the Air Force in high-altitude warfare. At that point, Tibet was a foreign country, of which the PLA commanders and soldiers had no experience. It was due to the need to gain such experience that 7 of its 12 military commands were directly involved in the counterinsurgency operation. Another 2 of them provided logistic support. Personnel from nearly all branches of the armed forces were sent to Tibet to participate. This was not because they faced serious military opposition. It was because it was a live training exercise that would be essential to the project of building up battle-ready military forces on the Tibetan Platter. This leads to the next question, which is, why did China need battle-ready military forces on the Tibetan Platter and on the border with India? The answer is, apparently, because China considered a military posture towards India in the Himalayas as essential to the long-term maintenance of control over the plateau. Zhang Lin's article goes on to demonstrate that preparations for war with India began as soon as the suppression of the rebellion came to an end, which was in early 1962, and that some of the same units involved in the bombardment of Lhasa in March 1959 and other episodes in the suppression of the counter-revolutionary rebellion, which were under the command of Shang Guohua, were the same ones that led the attack on Tawang in October 1962. That is the background to the 1962 war, which I believe has not been adequately understood, but more generally and more importantly for us and for the discussions today, this is the background to China's posture on the border then and since, up to the present day. And what we're now seeing with China's contemporary moves on the border are, I'm going to suggest, more or less a continual and loose outcome of that initial posture. So I think this article goes a long way to establish that the origins of the war have primarily to do with Chinese expansionism more than they have to do with Indian incompetence, grave though that admittedly was, and that has now been well recognized. I don't need to go into it, but on this question of why did China want to have battle-hardened troops stationed permanently on the Tibetan Platter, I think we can say a little bit more to understand where China is coming from, what its perceptions are of this border, and what the implications are, for everybody else involved. There's a couple of points to make about that. I think the first one is quite obvious, but may need spelling out in any case, and that is that China, meaning the Chinese Communist Party and the state, has a fundamentally nationalist agenda and a great power agenda, and seeks, as most great powers do, strategic dominance in its neighborhood. In this mindset, in this perception of matters, India is, in objective terms, an opponent. This is a strategic perception. It's not necessarily dependent on the waxing and waning of conciliation and aggression and the various postures and ideologies that both sides may put forward. It's the basic strategic perception, and we see it borne out in China's behavior, then and up to now. The second point, at slightly greater length, is insecurity. Talking first of all about the situation back then, when the two countries came to war in the early 1960s, immediately after the suppression of resistance to China's occupation of Tibet. At that time, the PLA was a fledgling, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, was a fledgling state with few friends in the unpredictable international environment of the Cold War. Its occupation of Tibet was a massive violation of the principles of the UN Charter and had brought sudden and drastic changes to the geopolitical status quo in Asia. Just as a matter of fact, regardless of what anyone said about it at the time, that was the reality. And no world power obviously had interests in Tibet which were sufficient to mount a challenge to China, a physical challenge or a military challenge at least, or a challenge of really any substantial kind. But the only exception to that is India. India is the only country whose interests, its strategic, diplomatic, economic interests, were significantly affected by this geopolitical shift that had just taken place. And on top of that, China saw the Republic of India, the new Republic of India, newly independent, as a crony of the Western imperialist powers. So from the very start, the possibility of peaceful coexistence and development cooperation with India was simply ruled out. Establishing an international border along the Himalayan range, thousands of miles from China's natural and historical borders, Western borders in this part of the world, was de facto an expansionist act at India's expense. And China's strategy for maintaining this situation was, and I'm suggesting it still is, to project a military threat across the Himalaya, primarily to intimidate India and to pin it down. But when China said, as it said publicly, that it fought the 1962 war to teach India a lesson, this was the lesson that they meant. I haven't come up with a particularly good a description, I'm just going to describe this approach as aggression being the best form of defense. That's the nature of the approach that China has taken, took in 1962 and has taken since. Aggression is the best form of defense. It keeps India on the defensive, but also it successfully redefines the issue of contention between the two countries as the border, rather than as the liquidation of a neighboring country. It also requires that the border disputes remain unresolved and thus continue to provide opportunities to exert pressure and exploit psychological advantages. I would suggest that the claim that China later mounted, in fact, only in this century, early years of this century, China turned to this claim of whole Arunachal. This is a very good example, I think, of aggression being the best form of defense. It's an extraordinary claim. It has, I mean, as far as I know, there's no comparable claim to this in the history of modern international relations. It has no basis whatsoever in history, in custom, or in law. Unlike, very much unlike, the claim to Taiwan, which has a strong historical basis in which the Chinese side has exploited and continues to exploit for understandable reasons from their side. But what is the point of claiming whole Arunachal? It's not something that you can negotiate about. It's not something that makes any sense. It's not something that leaves anyone any the wiser. What it does is it serves to frustrate and confuse India, which I argue is the primary objective. It deflects attention away from Tibet, and it endlessly postpones a negotiated settlement to the existing border issues. In other words, it's a form of psychological warfare. So I want to suggest that China's posture and basic goals on the Indian border have not changed since the time that the two countries went to war. And the new border villages that we've seen come up in the last few years are, have made this, more evident than it was previously. President Xi's signature Tibet policy has been mentioned by previous speakers. The maxim which says that it's to govern the country, we must stabilize the borders, and to stabilize the border, we must stabilize Tibet. When Xi Jinping introduced this as his sort of personalized Tibet policies, more or less at the time when he came to office, he was sending a very key signal of intent that the next stage of consolidation in Tibet would be to build up the border and thus to step up pressure on India. And arguably, this has echoes of what I was just talking about, the history of the 1962 war, the dual need, the perception on the Chinese side of the dual need both to stabilize Tibet and to mount an aggressive posture on the border towards India to cope with any opposition or any threat, or again, this permanent sense of insecurity that China has about such a act of territorial acquisition. In the 5 years intervening between the time, more or less the time that he first introduced this concept of the border being key to Tibet policy, and October 2017, when he corresponded with Xiaokang and Yangzom in Yume, China did make significant gains in its basic policy objectives in Tibet. Infrastructure construction was taking place on a huge scale, greater allowing in turn for greater economic integration with the mainland and the rest of the country, and also what they refer to as social management, which means basically digitally assisted preventive policing, locking down populations inside Tibet through a combination of human and technological surveillance, control, and various policy initiatives which implicate and involve the Tibetan population to a much greater extent than was previously the case with state policies and with state-controlled employment, education, and so on. Huge advances were made to the extent that by 2017, when this so-called poverty alleviation campaign and the relocation that attended poverty alleviation in Tibetan areas from 2016 to 2020 was really underway, having a great momentum, and China had developed the capacity to build villages in large numbers wherever it wanted, more or less. This at a time when basically China's policy essentials and considerations had been met in terms of locking down Tibet, stabilizing it, integrating it. Basically, they won't admit that it had been met. They won't say, okay, that end of story, job done. But basically, they had made huge advances and were in a much more comfortable position. And logistically, we're in a much stronger position. Internationally, we're also much more confident. This was the moment they chose to step onto the next phase, which is turning to the Indian border to build it to their satisfaction, to construct, to repopulate, and to securitize the border. And I made this maybe obvious to everyone, but I just wanted to point that out, the historical continuity in this process. And I think the last point that I'll make, because I want to be quick, is that today, as of this year or the last year or two, that so far the two largest clusters of new border villages that have been built on the entire length of the border are in the two places that saw fighting in 1962: Sona, which is opposite Tawang, and Zayu, which is opposite the Walong sector. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Achester, for putting the whole issue of Xiaokang villages in the context of history, the narrative that is being built up on securitizing the borders, others. Thank you very much for that. Let's move on to our next speaker, Professor Robbie Barnett. He is currently at the SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, and an affiliate with the King's College. He had written extensively on Tibet. It's a pretty long list of publications, very important ones. Over to you, Robbie.
Sorry about the delay. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you to the Foundation for inviting me, and thank you to the other speakers. I hope you can all hear me clearly. I'm going to follow from Matthew's comments, basically, at a more granular level, to try and look at this question of how the strategic issues appear for China. In doing so, I want to really reframe the discussion away from issues of, as seen from India, which primarily frames this kind of issue in terms of threat and aggression and expansionism. I want us to, of course that may be right, but I want us to look particularly at what are the diplomatic negotiating implications of these particular border villages. And when we look at this issue, I want to try and think, how do China's strategists see these border villages playing into actual negotiations that are going to happen with countries on its borders? And I'm going to talk particularly about Bhutan. Firstly, I'm going to talk about these northern sector villages in Japan, which are cross-border villages. There are only basically 6 known cross-border villages. Villages that are built on the other side, far side of the traditional border that China has with India or Bhutan. And you've heard quite a lot of discussions and illustrations of 2 of those, Pangda and Longju. I'm going to talk about 4 others that have emerged. They're not very many, and they're not likely to be followed by very many villages if Bhutan and India and maybe Nepal respond strongly to these first 6 villages. We'll have to see. But they may be tests of resolve in a way as China, as Matthew suggested. But if we look at Bhutan overall, China has 7 claims, major claims in Bhutan. Some of those claims are rather recent, but they are supported by quite extensive archival documents, which give it an advantage. Sering Shakya, the great Tibetan historian, has pointed out that China's, when it defends a border claim or promotes a border claim, it tends to use grassroots local historical documents, grazing rights and so on, whereas the southern Himalayan parties tend to use colonial justifications, which are much easier for China to marginalize and undermine. That's a good example of how a country like China is strategizing for advantage around the negotiating table. And I think we should keep that kind of insight in mind. This is a diagram, a map with very detailed annotations. There's about 120 iterations of this map on China's internet these days. It's been around since the 1980s, so it's been circulated very widely. Each of those boxes in Chinese gives rather detailed historical justification for China's claims to each of those areas in Bhutan. So this is something that has been developed over a long time, and you get hundreds, or I don't know, hundreds, but scores of articles on unofficial Chinese media by Chinese individuals, Chinese historians, Chinese promoters of national interest supporting these claims. So there's a very active social media community behind this, which is mobilized. What are China's aims in Bhutan? Well, we know pretty much what the public aims are: to get Bhutan to allow China to have diplomatic representation or presence in Bhutan. Now, Bhutan has a very sophisticated and clever way of avoiding that demand by avoiding the presence, a formal presence of any of the P5, permanent 5 members of the Security Council in Bhutan. So it's able to say to China, it's not an anti-China move at all. It's a general Bhutanese policy. That's a very interesting example of how a sophisticated Bhutanese diplomat strategizes. It doesn't alienate, doesn't antagonize China, its powerful neighbor, but it sacrifices the opportunities to have alliances with other P5 members. But secondly, of course, China wants to get terrain advantage over India. We've heard something about that. And in particular, to obtain strategic territory near Doklam. We'll see that more in a moment. Now, the key issue here when we think about the negotiating strategy for China, and we try to think of Bhutan's position as well, the key issue for both sides is friendliness. When we're thinking about China on the border in India these days, we're thinking of antagonism. But that's not the formal public attitude between Bhutan and China. China specifically declares Bhutan to be a friend, even though it has a very clear alliance, basically a military alliance with India, and Bhutan reciprocates. Likewise, also an important and sophisticated negotiating position for it to take. So we're not talking about states that are locked in enmity. We're not talking about the conditions that Matthew just described in China's view of India, about probably a structural view really, in the 1950s and since then. We're talking about China that officially regards Bhutan as a friendly nation. This is partly because Bhutan is reciprocated by supporting China in the UN, including on quite controversial issues. And they've held 24 rounds of border talks. And in those talks, or some of the sidelines of those talks, Bhutan has ceded a very significant area, Kulakaguni, to China. So Bhutan has been pretty flexible so far. And China also showed flexibility in 1990 by signing an agreement with Bhutan. Let's look at, that's just an image of last round of talks, I think. That's the Kulakaguni area. You can see that Bhutan ceded to China. Bhutan described it not as giving something to China, but as a mistake in its own mapping, that the claim had been an error. We don't know when it made that ceding. It only announced it when new maps were issued, I think, around sort of something. But we can see flexibility by the smaller party, and we can see claims of friendship by the larger party, both parties. And here we can see the big claim by China, Article 3 of the 1998 agreement, that China, neither side would resort to unilateral action to alter the status quo of the border. Now that was important in 1998, that allowed talks to continue. But when we look at cross-border villages, in the ones we're going to look at, the case we're going to look at, that clearly suggests violation, unilateral violation of that agreement by China. So the question I want to ask is, what drives China to do that? Setting aside sort of psychological notions of aggression or enmity, what in terms of strategic benefit is China expected to get out of that from So I'm going to look briefly at the Western sector. We don't need to talk about this much because Claude Arpi and Colonel Budd have significantly described this. We have the claims around Doklam in the southwest. You can see it roughly there. Just put it on the map. Very close to the so-called chicken neck, Siliguri, India's geographic weak point, strategically. And what we see in the Western sector, and we're going to see it in the Northern sector too, is a gradual build-up of incursion or of pressure by the Chinese side. It starts with negotiations, it gets amplification in Chinese media, we saw that with the map, and then moving locals across the border to harass other locals. Let's skip the details of that, because we'll come to that more in a moment. This ended with the announcement about Pangda, which was purposefully announced in English, I think, by this Chinese official that alerted Indian media existence of this village, which you saw and Colonel Ball illustrated for us. So that's the first known cross-border village built across a generally accepted international border. It's not quite clear now whether it was the international border, because we don't know what Bhutan has agreed with China with regard to the border in that area, but this remains uncertain. But when we look at the northern sector, we find two major things. Firstly, there are cross-border villages. Secondly, they had basically begun work on those some 5 years before Pangda, and nobody had noticed, it seems. And thirdly, they do seem to be categorically across south of the international traditional border. Those areas in the northern sector, actually strictly the northeastern sector, are the Jakalung Valley, Paksamlung Valley, Menchumal, and in theory, Chuksom. I'll explain those a little bit more. The key thing for us to think about here is that Chuksom is that the area that we're talking about that China has set its cross-border villages in is the Bayu Kempajong. That's an incredibly important traditional historical religious site, one of the so-called hidden valleys that was familiar to followers of Pamasambhava throughout the Tibetan Buddhist and Bhutanese world. And you can see here this chart of so-called hidden valleys. This is the Bayu Kempajong, probably the most important religious zone in Bhutan, or one of them. And you can see it here a bit more detail, and you can see it very interesting chart of Pema Wanchuk that in 2002, the Boundaries Secretary in Bhutan, giving a talk to the National Assembly, where you can see behind him, he is marked out the Bayu Kempajong, presumably to show them that this is an area that China was then claiming. But in 2002, China didn't actually have control of that area, but it was claiming it. We can see why the traditional border is so firmly attested in this area, although Bhutan doesn't probably have much documentation on this the way the Chinese do. There is plenty of reference to these two passes, Namgungla and Burla, as the traditional markers of the borders between Tibet and China. But in this map, produced by China, the most detailed official Chinese map we have of Tibet from the early 1980s, it's quite clear that the border did not go south of those two passes, the Bayu and also Menchuma, that's the area just to the east, was south of that border in 1981 when that map was produced. Here's John Claude White, British political officer in Sikkim in the early 20th century, clearly describing the Burla as the border, and not just a notional border, the Tibetan blockhouse with troops on the far side of that border, at the top of the pass. We find a fascinating ambiguity in China's own maps if we really dig deep. Here's a photo of Kun San Sering, who's really in Chinese popular media narratives about the, shall we say, the construction in the Bayu. He's the local hero who has led this effort for the Chinese party in the Chinese state. He's the party secretary in Lagyap. And here he is in an official video. If you look at the wall behind him, you see two maps. One map shows the Bayu and this is Menchuma Valley as parts of China, parts of Lodrok County. And the other map, they seem not to be parts of it, as far as I can tell. So we see these developments are really very recent indeed. Now, if we look at China's official, overall official map of its borders with foreign countries, this is that border that shows the Bayu as part of China. And here you can see it more clearly. That's the Bayu there as part of China. But if you look at in detail, That map only includes the western part of the Bayou, the Jakalong Valley. The eastern valley within the Bayou, the Pak Samlong, is not in China's claim area, although in practice, China has settled or has occupied with military outposts, not yet villages, Pak Samlong as well as Jakalong. So we see another discrepancy between its official maps and its actions on the ground. There's a third discrepancy that the map includes Chaksom, another important Bhutanese area, which is outside the Bayou. It's below the mountain ridges, and that is claimed on the maps, but China is not claiming that in practice. It hasn't settled those areas. You can see that more clearly here in this map, the discrepancy between the official claims and the actual claims. Let's move on to how does China actually actualize its claims on the border? Well, I've made a list there. Let me demonstrate that a little bit clearly. It's really a 25, 30-year period that it gradually escalates the nature of its incursions, that's to say the nature of its pressure on its neighbor to the point that we're at now. So it's really quite a slow, careful progression. It isn't even, it's escalated very dramatically in the last 5 years, but the first 25 years of that step-by-step push by China was very gradual, really very low-key, until suddenly in 2015, construction begins. We can map that out a little bit more clearly here. In the beginning, China offers Bhutan a deal, a package deal. Now, this is crucial. China is not seeking to obtain the Bayou for China, or not, or most of it. It's seeking to get a claim to it and then to swap that claim for the area around Doklam. Now, this is really helps us think about what Matthew Achester just asked us about Arunachal. Why make this, shall we say, fictitious or unsubstantiated claim to the whole of Arunachal when you couldn't really sustain it? Well, it's also part of a package deal. Something similar was done with Nepal, actually. So this is Chinese negotiating strategy. You dispute an area, make it, especially if it's an area that's very important to your neighbor, and then you try to get them to give you something in return for giving up that claim. So here we see a clear negotiating kind of tactic involved. When, in this case, Bhutan does not respond positively to that package deal, it did respond positively in the first few years after 1990, but gradually backed off, presumably under Indian pressure or some other kind of reconsideration. And by 2007, Bhutan had an alliance treaty, a new treaty with India, which required it to respect Indian national security interests. So it probably couldn't accept the package deal by then. But as that happens, China steps up pressure. But it's very low-level step up. It's local herders being sent to harass herders, Bhutanese herders in the Bayou. There's no settled population in the Bayou after 1962, after the 62 war. So it's just seasonal herders and occasional Bhutanese soldiers accompanying them. That local harassment sends signals to Thimphu, but it doesn't get Bhutan to change its position on the package deal. And we see the dramatic step up. First 2012, the survey work, then 2015, construction work begins, and finally by 2018, the first village is completed. So we've moved to settlement. So those 3 years, 2015 to 2018, very rapid development of construction, moving all the way to settlement, 2 years before Pangda or Longju were even begun. So this seems to be a result of no response by India, America, Bhutan, no public response to the build-up. And that's really the remarkable feature of this is why did those countries, particularly Bhutan and India, keep so silent? We can understand why Bhutan kept silent, because Bhutan has to play a very, very careful role in this issue. But we want to try to understand why the Indians didn't act on this dramatic development in cross-border village building in the north of Bhutan, and whether that was a signal to China that it had an opportunity to really accelerate that construction. Now I'm just going to show you some images quickly. This is what road building looked like between 2017. You see the first road across the Himalayas into the Bayou, and then you see a second road and a transverse road There you can see it's a pretty primitive road, but it's very significant for military and access. And now you can see the full set of roads, at least as they were about 6 months ago. The yellow marks the new roads, right across, reaching about 20 kilometers into Bhutan. And this area that we're talking about of Bhutan, the Bayul and the Menchima, is about 1% of Bhutan's territory, so not insignificant at all. Well, military, of course, is a major issue here. Colonel Butt will be able to analyze this much better than I could, but that looks to me like a barracks or some kind of military compound, and I would guess it could hold 100 or so troops. We have no idea who's in there. We don't see vehicles yet, but I'm sure we'll gradually will see that kind of evidence. But this is clearly a military base. Very striking military, undefined, unidentified structure. You can see there with the long shadow, that's about 150 feet tall, we think. Probably the base of some radar type dome, something like that, built on the northern edge of the Bayou. So there's some significant military infrastructure appearing. Here's something, I have no idea what this is. I hope somebody will be able to tell me. A very strange, maybe it's some kind of pipe, but there's nothing else around there. No roads, no dwellings deep in the Bayou on the Paksamlo. And here we see Wu Yingzhe visit to the village, the main village in the Bayou that China has built in he visited in 2020. This is what alerted Matthew Achester to informing me and others that China was building villages across the Namgungla into Bhutan. And it was the publicity around Wu Yingzhe's visit that alerted to us to that. And that, I would guess, is the key image that China, in its television coverage of Wu Yingzhe's visit to the Bayou, that they wanted the world, or particularly Bhutan and India, to see that soldier with his rifle or with his finger on the trigger behind Wu Yingzhe at the top of the pass, just south, halfway into the Bayou. So this is really a military posture, and that's a military message being sent in that image. Well, the secondary feature, of course, is village construction. We know of 3 villages built so far, and a 4th tender, calls for tenders have been put out for the 4th village, Sedawal. You can see them here. And here we can see what that looks like. 20 years ago, this was an area which is now this village called Gyalapuk. And you can see it more closely here, television coverage. That's phase 1. And here you can see phase 2. And you can see the kind of discursive purpose of the village with that flag pointing south on the end wall of what Colonel Butt correctly described as the Communist Party administrative headquarters for that village, has the flag on it pointing south towards Bhutan. Very briefly, snapshots of village life. These are dominated by, as you heard, by nation-building activities. This is the Party and Serve the Masses Activity Center. That's the main building. These are the 2 of the original herders sent 30 years ago to overwinter in the Bayou to claim it for China. And these are political education sessions. National Day in October a couple of years ago. You can see troops there, as well as construction workers, as well as villagers, and then a lot of painting of the word China, and Chinese flags, and so on, and training the local villagers to trap Tibetans trying to leave Tibet or trying to enter. And this is a snapshot of the future, which is going to be about tourism, as you heard. Of course, this is all about parties, all led by party officials. You can see them here. Here, interestingly, a shot of party officials giving red envelopes to the herders who had been sent into the valley. So that means they're getting the presence of money. And we have to remember, this is not about force. These people aren't forced to go. They are given incentives, a lot of money to go and act as China's frontline settlers and defenders on these borders. And here's an important photo of the local party secretary. The furthest south into Bhutan we've ever seen one of these teams of party officials and troops move some 18, 20 miles into Bhutan there. I'm just going to finish quickly by making a couple of points. We tend to want to read this in terms of India defending itself and defending its interests, or against expansionism and ideological projection. That's how the Americans, especially under Pompeo, read these things. But I think we have a number of other options, which I think Matthew has hinted at, which is really this is about a diplomatic strategy of provocation. You have enormous dominance over your neighbors, over Bhutan, but not so much over India. And you want to see what mechanisms will put your neighbor at a disadvantage. And you practice this with Bhutan, even though Bhutan is ostensibly your friend. You provoke it. And the provocation seems to me to be in order to force, in this case, Bhutan to declare its alliances. This is a fundamental feature of communist relations and communist analysis of society and international relations. You want to use conflictual methods to force another party, another entity, to either declare its alliance with you or to declare its enmity. You want to push it away from the middle ground, which Bhutan and any other players now occupy. And if this is right, it's very unlikely that Bhutan could agree to a package deal. It therefore must be expected that Bhutan will have to refuse the package deal. That means that Bhutan will end up, if it's not careful, being forced into a position of not being a friend of China. This may be what China wants, conversely. It may want to redesign the architecture of the Himalayan political region by forcing the Himalayan states to either ally themselves clearly with India or ally themselves clearly with China, as we've seen with Pakistan. And we should expect this to happen with Bangladesh, and it's already happening, of course, gradually with Nepal. So this is a slightly different interpretation from the idea of territorial aggression, although that it certainly looks like that. But I think it helps us to try and see this more in terms of a strategic provocation in order to do what the Chinese call drawing a line, to force people to be either China's real friend or India's real friend in this case. I want to end with one question, really, what I call the 595 question. If you look at all the documents on China's package deal offer to Bhutan, it offers Bhutan to give up its claim to 495 square kilometers of the Bayul in return for something I think is 246 square kilometers in Bhutan's west around Doklam. But actually, the size of the Bayul and Menchuma is about 600 or just under 600 square, I think, kilometers. That means there's 100 kilometers that does not appear to be included in the package deal. Nobody has yet paid attention to that. It could be just a miscalculation, could be a rounding off error, but it could be that China is going to hold on to the land it has captured by this construction drive in the Bayul on the south side of the high Himalayas, where we just saw some of those military structures and military bases are positioned. That's something that the military strategists, I think, will be looking at very carefully. Is China actually establishing a military foothold on the back of this diplomatic maneuver, which is based on a conflict diplomacy, on provocative negotiation moves? We will have to watch. But a key issue here will be, what is the response going to be, not so much of Bhutan, which has to play this very carefully and out of the public eye, but of India and other powers. And to that, we have to add, why has Western media, and even really Indian media, not really amplified this issue? It's very little coverage of this case has yet emerged. And so that's going to be an important signal in itself to China as to the potential success of this kind of strategy. I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Barnett. That's a comprehensive presentation with the Bhutanese territorial dispute in the background, its history, the terrain and negotiations, and a host of other issues. I was reminded of, you mentioned about the pushing the Himalayan states to take a decision. I was reminded of the Mao Zedong's 1927 article on the analysis of the classes in the rural society, where he mentions about the middle of the roaders and pushing them towards either to become poor peasants or aligned to the landlords with a feudal tail, as we call. And this is, of course, also part of the Chinese foreign policy strategy in last few decades. That has been intact in their practice. Thank you very much for that presentation. Now we have some time for discussion, and those who want to raise questions, please do, and be specific in terms of the speaker to whom you want to direct these questions. If your bandwidth is low, you can also put it up in the chat box so that we can.
Robbie, frustrated.
Who wants to raise an issue in the presentations that we have?
Shrikant, you asked one question about General Wang Heishan, who has been transferred first to Urumqi, to the Xinjiang military region, and now has been promoted in Western Theater Command. And he was transferred on the 1st of April to Urumqi, and more recently he was promoted. And something interesting about what you mentioned, that around May, June, it was not confirmed by any media that he had been transferred to Urumqi. He had been transferred, but we didn't know if he was the commander of the Xinjiang military district. So one program on the Lhasa TV one day showed him in Nari, because Nari sub-district is part of the Xinjiang military district. All the Ladakh front is part of the South Xinjiang military district. And he had a long conference. It was not a talk, because usually it's he goes and gives a speech. First of all, usually they don't hardly show these generals on TV. But that day he had a long conference with Chedala, who was the governor and head of the TAR, the Tibetan Autonomous Government, and all the big shots of the South Xinjiang military region was there. So I was wondering what they were discussing with the civilian government in Lhasa, because there's hardly any contact usually between the PLA commander and the civilian government, for one good reason at least, that the political commissar who is the senior most in the Tibetan military district is only number 6 in the hierarchy of the standing committee of the Politburo of the TAR. So I don't think they lack so much for their ego to be number 6, so they hardly attend the meetings. But the fact that Wang Hejiang met Chedala and spent several hours discussing things, I think it's part of an answer to your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do the panelists have questions to other panelists?
I just wanted to add to whatever Claude has said just now. He was promoted recently to a full general, Shangqiang, that is what they call, that is a full general. So that is how the political commissar again comes under him. So probably that is what has been covered up by Xi Jinping. He promoted 5 of the generals recently to full general status. But still they're wearing 3 stars only. They're not wearing 4 stars. They're wearing 3 stars, but they are called Shangqiang. That is a full general.
And about, if I may say, about Bhutan, I show one slide when Xi Jinping visited Tibet in July. He's on the banks of the Yalong Sampo at the confluence of the Yalong Sampo and the Palong Sampo, another tributary, and he's giving a brief. And there's a map. And in this map, Xiaokang area in Bhutan is included in Bhutan. And as Robbie is aware, that Xiaokang has been also one of the claims of China in Bhutan. No, because when Bhutan wanted to do a reserve there, the China objected and refused that bank grant some grants. So the fact that when Xi Jinping goes there, he is presented, is briefed about the area, and the map in front of him enlarge the map, and Xiaokang is clearly in Bhutan. So, as Robbie said, that sometimes the map will change. It does not mean that they will drop the claim, but the fact that when Xi Jinping himself is presented a map where Xiaokang is in Bhutan is a little bit strange. Huh?
Indeed. Now we have the Xiaokang villages, both in economic, demographic, military, defense related. We have also the historical background of how these villages have come up. There is a lot of finance involved. Some 21 billion renminbi has been spent on the 600 odd villages. Like much of the Chinese investment, it doesn't have the economic, productivity angle to it. So there are a number of questions related to finance. There are a number of questions related to the political correctness, because some mentioned about the Nepal, Bhutan, India border areas where the Chinese have unilaterally put up these villages in order to force possibly a kind of favorable resolution on the territorial dispute with these countries, even though they have had the territorial dispute resolution with Nepal in 1960. Nevertheless, they did had these border markers being removed. So we have a huge dynamics in relation to the Xiaokang villages. This is a very fascinating discussion. If there are no questions, then I would like to revert back to Ribbon.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Kondapalli. It would be nice if our audience would put their questions to our esteemed panels. We still have some minutes to go, so we shall wait till we have a question coming up from our online audience.
Sure.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have unmuted. And what is the danger that the mining activity in Lunze poses to India's sovereignty, if any? Anybody in the panel? I hope the question is clear.
I think I'll take it on. Not only Lunze, the rest of the Tibet also, there's lots of mineral riches and mineral reserves in that area. They are mining. Even near the Yulmet Gumpa, I think they have some gold mining going on. A large number of mining is happening, and that uses forced labor. So it really doesn't security-wise, in any way threaten India. But what threatens really is the dams which they are constructing on Brahmaputra. there are, I think, 13 dams that they have either constructed or planned, which will tomorrow affect us. And the largest one, they're likely to start, they've already started in Meetok. So that is what we should be worried about. The kind of water it can, hold and release at will. That is what is dangerous for India. Mining really doesn't make a difference. Large number, we've seen, earthquakes in that area and the water being stopped, but it continues. Brahmaputra is a huge river. It really cannot be stopped by, earthquakes and all. So that is really not a cause of worry. The cause of worry is the dams which they are constructing. That is what I feel. Thank you.
The big dam on the Metok song is not started. They have not yet decided. The survey will proceed during the coming 5-year plan. So it may take at least 5-6 years to start if it ever starts. And there have been so many landslide and mudslide around Pei, the starting of this big project, that maybe they will think twice about. So it's not question of releasing the water, because all these hydropower plants are run of the rivers. There is no retenue. And one of the reasons they give for having no retenue more than 50 meter high, that it could flood Bayi. Bayi is the main garrison for the PLA in the south. Bayi means 8-1 means August 1st, which is PLA day. So they don't want ever that this area, in case of flood, the Bayi would be also flooded. So it's one of the reasons that they give that. It will be very, very small retenue, hardly any reservoir, only run of the river.
Yeah, water issues are very important here. The Chinese Ministry of Water Resources, in their public reports, they suggested that the south-north diversion project of the western project, which includes the Yalung Zampo, through which they want to build tunnels upwards so that they can pump up water, and they have some 17 billion cubic meters of water transfer plan. But they suggested that the construction project will be completed in 2050. So there is it's futuristic in nature, but it looks like with the Zangmu Dam already constructed and the railway line to Metok, the infrastructure projects there to Metok, there is the prospect for the dam construction across the Yalung Zampo closer to the Namcha Barwa region. So there is the water related issue which is of significant problem for the Indian lower riparian states.
Mr. Kondapalli, can I?
Yes, please.
I have a question. In a sense, I would love to hear from one of the learned panelists. What is the response from India when we see so many villages being constructed by China on our Tibet border? What is the response? Because my observation once, and that's a very old observation, in 1992, when the border trade started between India and Tibet, on the tri-junction, Nepal, India and Tibet. So I had a chance to visit that area on behalf of India Today. And then from Dharchula, I had to walk 8 days up to the border. There was no road. And till then the policy was the old policy that we will not construct roads, because otherwise if we do it, China will walk into India through those roads. But because of that, not constructing roads, and the business was already dead for 30 years, I could see not hundreds, but dozens of villages I passed through were practically dead villages, where there was hardly any population. And in later years, we find that things have not improved. So on our side, we have been vacating our villages, which is the first line of defense. And China on the other side is constructing fresh villages. So if anybody could throw light on how India is responding to bring back its own population to its own villages, is something happening?
Sir, I have not seen any villages of India being, going back or something like that. I have not seen it. But certainly Indian Army is going ahead. The border roads are constructing roads now freely. And most of the laterals also have been constructed. You know that the Prime Minister had opened that tunnel also. So there is so many things happening, and border roads are being improved. We are improving our logistics, and we are in good hands.
No, that is there. I agree with you. We understand that there are 76 roads already either finished or on the verge of being finished, and every border post is being connected. My question is about the population. This negative flow of population over last 60 years has been a very, very negative thing. Is there any serious thought on, changing or at least improving the demographic personality of our villages on the border, or making some special steps about, creating jobs, housing, and of course, roads are going to help, but the real thing is demography. Is there anything seriously being done?
I think there's been thought. Thought is there, but concretely, nothing has been done. It's not easy. If you take Uttarakhand, where the situation is the worst, 600 or 700 ghost villages. Now, the CDS is from where from? Uttarakhand, the NSA is from where from Uttarakhand. The former RAW chief was there. So what has happened? Only thoughts. And because it's not easy. It's not easy. That's why the MLA from Arunachal met last week to choke out some plans. But you see, if people have more revenue in Dehradun or Itanagar or Guwahati, or same thing in Ladakh, the villages are emptying because people go for taxi driving in Leh. So unless you reverse this, you have to bring money to the people. Otherwise, and same thing for the Chinese. When they do the Xiaokang village, today they are sustaining with subsidies. How long will it last? Is it sustainable in 5 years, 10 years? Can these villagers that they brought from outside, can they sustain themselves? It means unless you bring revenue, and tourism is certainly one of the revenue, but it's not enough. In this Xiaokang village, they started small-scale handicrafts, incense making or textile or like that. But I have my doubt on the long-term sustainability of these villages. But in the case of India, it's really a difficult issue because look at the villages in Uttarakhand, how bad it is. And I think efforts have been put, but concretely it's not easy.
If I can intervene here, two things. One is the last October we opened up 44 strategic roads have been completed last October. Out of the 70 odd, 44 have been completed in all the sectors closer to the line of actual control. Number two is that the in terms of the border infrastructure and so on, when Kiran Rijiju was the Minister of State for Home, he initiated a $800 million project to to take back those who have left the LAC areas to the nearest towns and cities. So this is repopulating the LAC areas. So there was a program. I'm not sure how successful was it, but we have already instituted a fund for this process, and it is mainly concentrated, of course, in Arunachal Pradesh. I do not know how this has been disbursed so far, but we have a fund which was instituted in 2015. So, but one of the problems with these strategic roads and the repopulating of the LAC is that we have not matched the SMEs, small and medium enterprises, which should have been done. The local chambers of commerce should have been connected to this, because there is a prospect for the horticulture, agro industries, and income generation for the local population. However, this has not been done. So the structural problem with these strategic roads is the government of India is constructing them mainly for the military reasons rather than for the socio-economic. And if you club up these two, then obviously people will shift over, because these are traditional habitats. Of course, we do have problems in relation to the road construction in scheduled tribes areas. Under the constitutional provisions, we cannot construct infrastructure, although this has been relaxed by this government. Yet there are restrictions in terms of any infrastructure project being built in the habitats, indigenous people habitats. I see in the chat box a question related to, could India or Bhutan be possibly mirror any salami slicing at the border and incentivize their own population to press along the border? What is the weakest point in the Chinese border approach? Can any of the speakers elaborate on this?
Sir, I think I already replied to that before you asked that question.
What is the weakest point in Chinese border approach?
By now, the PLA is already, strengthened itself everywhere, all along the borders, everywhere. Especially India-Tibet border, everywhere they've come up very well, and they are, keeping a track. Their surveillance and recce is, they have better resources than India, and they are making full use of it. So really, the senior lot must be having their hands full in the army to find gaps, and that is what happened in August last year. When we also went in and took certain areas on that Kailash range. You can see even now at certain places we are almost 3 kilometers inside. It is obviously, it is India's claimed areas, but still we are inside what China claims to be their area. So that way we are alert, and things must be being planned. Thank you.
General Sharma wants to raise an issue. Could you come up? General Sharma?
Yes, thank you, Professor Srikanth. I will avoid switching on the camera because of bandwidth issues. First is the issue about the roads and the population in Ladakh. In Ladakh, we have population right till the very end. Demchok, the population exists. There are border development programs on there in Demchok, and we see the construction being carried out on these villages opposite Demchok. It's a proper construction being carried out. So Demchok, Phukche, Dungti, Loma, and the villages along the Pegong. So the other side, Chumar village is a stone's throw from the area of 30R, and so is Hanle. And most of these areas have also got homestays. So there are people there are NGOs who are working on say schools, etc. Go and stay there in the homestays and work on the schools. So only thing is about Ladakh is in northern areas, the areas which is towards the subsector north. After Shok village, there is no habitation because there wasn't a road and there were restrictions. But I think it's a good idea now that the road has come up towards Gibyo, that we can push some people to stay there. There are also, I won't say there are SMEs, but there are big factories or big works on for making shawls, which are being done by the state administration. There is one in Chumathang, there is one at Loma, and those are functioning fairly well. So I think, there is a impetus that I won't compare the same thing to Arunachal Pradesh, but I think this Ladakh is a little different kettle of fish. And the second issue I wish to raise is that issue about the weakest point in the Chinese border approach. Frankly, after 2010, that's about 10, 11 or 12 years that we have seen every instance that has happened, especially on the Ladakh frontier. It's the contact, it's the fisticuffs, it's the scuffles. That's what the Chinese, the weakest point. They do not wish to get involved into hand-to-hand things. And wherever it has happened, and whichever time, in 2012, 13, 14, I was there, whenever it happens, that's the thing that irks him the most. Even if at one time they got 50 odd horses coming across in one particular area, the people could bodily lift up the horses and throw them down. So the fact is, he does not wish to get into contact. The soldier, he can put villages there, but his soldier doesn't want to come into physical contact. That, I think, is his weakest link out here. And that is where my view is that, all that present day work which is on to create some kind of buffers, he wants to keep standoff distance from contact with the Indian troops. Thank you, Professor Srikanth. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much. That is, I think, very appropriate. We have also a few more questions in the chat box. What is the possible reason for the fourth Western Theatre Commander in 1 year? Can anybody mention about this? Second, there is another question. Colonel Sanal, Brigadier Sanal has pointed out that the weakest point of the PLA in the short to medium term is the Tibetan population itself, if India can use them. So there is the hostile population in Tibet for the Chinese rule. Can anybody reflect on this?
The Tibetan population are certainly the most difficult issue for China. And that's why last 2 months, 11 members of the Politburo visited Tibet, because I think in 70 years they have not been able to manage so well, the Tibetans. And despite the monitoring, the cameras everywhere, the Tibetans are still restive and they are very, very nervous about it. 11 members out of 25 of the Politburo is not nothing. I don't think any province in China has seen so many members. So the Tibetan, I agree with Brigadier Sanal that the first issue is the Tibetan population for Xi Jinping and China.
I agree with you on this. There is some surveys and some Chinese also stated that less than 1% of the people in Tibet side with the Chinese government. Some Central Party school commentators mentioned it. Some, in my personal interviews in China, I had a similar impression. So the major weakness of China is in Tibet with the Tibetans itself, number one. Number two, there is so much of investment in infrastructure which doesn't have economic returns from Tibet because of its landlocked nature. Most of the territory has this landlocked nature. They are trying to open up for Nepal, but that is in itself not a very lucrative proposition. So economy is a second problem. The third, of course, there is the environmental fallout, so much of construction and the environmental ecological problem. This is going to, in medium to long term, this is going to be a big problem as some commentators have mentioned on the environmental issues. So there are problems with the Chinese PLA. Recently, the Chinese PLA began genetic studies in looking at the Tibetans. It appears in the Chinese press that the Tibetan genes have 30 specific genes which can accommodate low oxygen levels. So they are doing a CRISPR-Cas technology gene editing for the Han Chinese who are going to migrate to Tibet. So, of course, the genetic modification is going to be a 2 to 3 decades at least, not a short-term impact. But that is one that I read somewhere in the Chinese press related to the Tibetans. The other is Claude mentioned about the recruitment of Tibetans into the PLA. That is a huge gamble. The Chinese are assuming that the Tibetan loyalty will be that of the CCP because the PLA is a CCP organ rather than the PRC organ. So this is a gamble that they are maintaining. And the joke that I heard was that the Indian army need not fight; they just have to carry the Dalai Lama's photograph. All the Tibetans will come towards this side if there is an engagement between the two. That's a joke, of course, but that indicates to the hostile nature of the Tibetans to the Communist Party's rule within Tibet. There are several other weaknesses, but nevertheless. It looks like we ran out of questions from the audience. Let me thank the distinguished speakers. Wonderful job, fantastic, ideas that have been floated. This is really a good fair that we had so far. Let me thank each speaker for the contributions made for enlightening us on this issue. Xiaokang villages is a very important for both the Tibetans in terms of the demographic changes that are being brought about, as well as to India, Bhutan, Nepal, and other bordering countries in relation to the other side. So let me thank each of the speakers for excellent presentations, and also for the audience for raising a number of questions, interesting questions. We want to wind up with a very happy birthday to Mr. Tandon, the FNVA's major figure, inspiration for the activities, and also to Rebon and many volunteers who have helped us in this putting up the publicity, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and happy birthday, Mr. Tandon.
Mr. Tandon, would you like to say something? Kindly unmute, sir. Please unmute, sir.
Yeah. Can you hear?
Yes, yes.
Well, I would like to thank each one of you for giving me your very good wishes. It has been really a very excellent presentation from the panelists, and of course the topic is very interesting, and of course the presentation has been very educative also. So we thank all the panelists on behalf of our organization, FNVA, and thanks to Mr. Professor Kondapalli for conducting the webinar so very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.